I believe we are going to finish up Ruth today. Now, as far as what we're going to be studying afterwards, I'm not for sure. I've got a couple of things in mind, and Roger had another thing in mind that he was going to give me an idea last Wednesday, and I wasn't here this last Wednesday, or actually he was going to be the Wednesday before that. We never have gotten together on that yet, so it may be a surprise next week. But we will continue in Ruth chapter 4. I believe we ended somewhere around verse 12 last week. Not last week, 2 weeks ago, before Matt was here. But basically, the last time we met, Boaz, we always thought from the beginning that Boaz and Ruth were going to be, that was a done deal. But then when we found out that he was not really the closest kinsman, and that he had to ask another one that was closer to Naomi to be the redeemer for Naomi and Ruth. So we know that he is, I mean, honestly, he could have probably just stepped in and just done whatever he wanted. I mean, he was a wealthy guy, wasn't he? I mean, he could have just went ahead and married Ruth and just took care of him, but he wanted to follow what was right, didn't he? He wanted to follow God's laws. So what he did was he said, Ruth, I've got to get a hold of this guy at the front gates of the city because he's the next in line. And I have to make sure that if he wants to redeem Naomi, Ruth, his land and everything, that goes through. I'm not going to mess up the plans that God has already put in place as far as his laws. So he goes to the front gate. He talks with the next of kin. He says, here's the deal. You're the next in line to redeem her. Everything. Her, Ruth, the land. And what was his answer right off the bat?
I'll do it.
What's that?
I'll do it.
I'll do it. Sure thing. You bet.
Nah.
His first thought was, hey, I'm going to acquire some land in this deal. This is going to be a good thing. But then Boaz explains, you're not only getting the land, you're getting Naomi and Ruth, the Moabitess, the foreigner. And, you're not only going to take care of the land, you're going to take care of them. Then what's his response? Not quite so positive, was it? It was like, I think I'm going to have to pass on this, When it came to that, I'm sure that in Boaz, in his mind, he's thinking, yes, now I have the legal right to redeem them as the next of kin. Did he have a problem with Naomi? Not at all, did he? He definitely didn't have a problem with Ruth. Was he interested in their land so much?
No.
He had plenty, didn't he? He was well off. He didn't need the land. His main concern was taking care of them, Naomi and Ruth. And of course, this was all done at the front gates. It was witnesses, so that it was nothing, no shady deals going on here. The elders, they were all in agreement. In verse 11, then the elders and all those at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrath, and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. And I think we talked a little bit about that the last time, as far as they were giving him the blessing. And they were basically giving him a blessing for the offspring that he would have. As we go to the end of this chapter, we're going to look at the lineage of how this all came down and how it all leads to David, which, as we know, David leads clear on through to the New Testament to Jesus. It's amazing how all of this, when you start looking at the lineage, how this all came together. And was it just by happenstance? Was it by accident? Was it by people making mistakes? What was it? God's providence. It was all the way he planned it. And I know we would never plan the way he did in someone being a king, being a savior to the world. We would not have put all of these glitches in there at all. We would have wanted to make everything just perfect, wouldn't we? But yet it shows that God can work with imperfection and make it perfect. Just as he does with us today. We're not perfect. But he can work with us to make us that way. So we'll start off in verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Okay. When you think about it, remember, she was married for how long?
10 years.
10 years. She have a kid?
Nope.
Didn't have a kid. What's going on there? Did you see that there, what he said? And the Lord enabled her to conceive. She evidently wasn't meant to have kids before, was she?
Perfect standard says, Jehovah gave her the conception.
Mm-hmm. So it was his idea, the Lord's idea. She is going to have a son. What if she'd have had sons with the other? With Elimelech's son? Then we would have had more complications, wouldn't we? But evidently the Lord said, nope. Even though you've been with him for 10 years, and I'm sure they were both eager to do whatever, nothing happened until now. And he enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Who are they talking to here? Who are the women talking to? They talking to Ruth? The one that had the kid? Talking to Naomi. In all reality, this book called Ruth is about Naomi, isn't it? What she went through. When she came back to Bethlehem after losing her husband and 2 sons, how did she feel? Bitter, empty, broken. It's unhappy. All of the things that we would go through, wouldn't we? If these things happened to us. She didn't even want to be called Naomi, did she? She wanted to be called Mara. Bitterness. But through all of this, did she lose her faith in God? She didn't, did she? She continued. She didn't rebel against him. She continued. She was upset, discouraged, but she didn't lose her faith. And what is happening now? She is getting that kinsman. Basically, her lineage is going to be continued down through all of this. Now she is not unhappy. She is not bitter. She's fulfilled. Because she knows that things are going to happen in her life that didn't happen before. Yes?
I think it just, like you can apply it to our lives, because there's a lot of times, like they didn't know any of this was going to happen. And
Right.
If they're in the moment, of what's going on, she got bitter and she was broken and everything.
Mhm.
But God, we just got to trust, and sometimes that's hard to do,
Yep.
because you're going through it at that moment.
Right.
But then when you do it God's way, you learn something from it.
Mhm.
That's the most important thing. Learn doing it, coming out of it the right way, God's way.
Right.
Then you learn something from it, and then you trust more.
Mhm. You have more faith, don't you? You have more trust, you have more faith. When we're in that moment, though, it's pretty tough, isn't it? When we can't see what is coming around the corner. When we're at the end of the rope, and God says, okay, I've got you, just let go. How hard is it? What we want to do is tie a knot in the end of the rope and hang on, don't we? We don't want to let go. We want to hang on with all of our might. We don't want to let go. But he's saying you have to let go. Naomi let go. After losing her husband and 2 sons, 2 daughter-in-laws go on the way to Bethlehem and one decides to go back. Can be discouraging. And she didn't know what was going to be left for her, did she? Because as we've spoken before, what was a woman's worth at that time? Pretty much nothing without a man. She was known by the man in her life, the husband. And she didn't have one. And she's going back to Bethlehem. And what is there going to be there for her? But yet, as we see throughout all of this happening, and I'm not sure exactly if there's a timeline, if this has been 1 year or if this has been maybe a couple of years. I mean, we talked about the harvest, but we don't know if that's one single harvest of whatever, 2 or 3 months, or maybe this was going on for a couple of harvests. Maybe it's been a couple of years. We don't really know for sure. But what we do know is that God's providence in this led Ruth through all of the things that went on between her and Boaz, starting out, as we said, as a servant, then one closer than a servant, and now, basically, a wife. Can you imagine how she felt? Let alone Naomi feeling great. Ruth is probably feeling, wow, this is pretty amazing too. So for your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? To say your daughter-in-law would be better than 7 sons. Now remember, the sons were pretty important, weren't they? The daughters that were born, we don't really talk about those, do we? But it's the sons, those are the ones that's going to carry on. And what did Ruth have? A daughter? No, she had a son. That's the next kinsman redeemer. And what was his name? Obed. Kind of we don't really think of that much, do we? Obed. as well as some of the others that you read on over there, you know, Nashon and Hezron and some of them. We don't really think of them much, but they are all in the lineage of David, who continues on to the lineage of Jesus. And we, Cindy?
And remember who the father, or excuse me, the mother was of Boaz,
Yeah.
Of,
Rahab.
Right.
exactly. Prostitute. And we discussed it before, Perez. You know, how did he have his son? Tamar. Or not his son. He was the son of Judah and Tamar. Perez. And we're thinking, Tamar was probably a pretty good gal. But then she dressed herself as a harlot and slept with her father-in-law. You think, wow, that's kind of weird, isn't it? But yet this is how it all comes through. And yet God made good of something that was bad. And it continues all the way down through when you start really looking at some of that lineage. Jill and I was looking up things this morning, and it's amazing how everything intertwines on all of this lineage. It's like, how does this work? So verse 16, then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So these women, they're putting this baby to Naomi, aren't they? She's the one that's honored here, isn't she? Because that lineage is coming down through. Doesn't distract so much from Ruth because she's the one that had it, right? But what was Ruth? Was she an Israelite? She was a Moabite. She was a foreigner. And when you think of that, you think, well, were they discriminating against her? No. They were just thrilled to death that Naomi had a kinsman redeemer to go on down through the line, to keep that line together. Because if that had not have happened, what would have happened? The line would have been broken. Then we couldn't say that, hey, we can trace this all the way forward to Jesus. So they say Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed, the father of Jesse, and who was the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, and we talked about Perez being of Judah and Tamar. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nashon. Nashon, the father of Salmon. And Salmon was married to, as Cindy mentioned, Rahab, prostitute. Salmon was the father of Boaz, who Ruth just married. Boaz married Ruth. Boaz, the father of Obed, the child that they just had. Obed, the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. And then we could go clear on down the line and trace it all the way. If you go to Matthew 2, I think it is, or 1, starting in verse 2, I think, then it basically gives all the way through. Isn't that amazing? What was interesting, too, is the fact that Nashon had a sister. Do you know who she was? Elisheba. Do you know who she married? Aaron, the first high priest of the tribe of Levi. Isn't it amazing how that... Now, if we go to Luke, I think it is, where we have the lineage of Mary. When we go clear back, she was the cousin of Elizabeth. If you trace that all the way back, you know where you end up? Aaron. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing how that all is? I mean, that family tree had lots of branches on it, but you know what? It all comes back. And how it's intertwined. So when we see all of this together, what can we draw, from this whole book that we've studied? What can we draw from this? We know that God's providence it was a done deal, wasn't it? Before we even started reading, we knew that God's providence was going to be there. There was nothing happenstance about it. There was no luck involved. We see that he's using someone that's considered a foreigner. In Jesus' time, who was considered a foreigner? When Jesus walked this earth, who was considered a foreigner? Anyone but a Jew, basically, right? Anyone but a Jew. They were foreigners. Gentiles.
So a Moabite was considered a Gentile?
Yep. How does God work with them? He works in great ways, doesn't he? It tells us right now that God was working with Gentiles, foreigners, even at this time. Before Christ was even on the picture.
A Gentile would be in Christ's lineage.
Exactly. Rahab. All of them. They were not Jews. They were Gentiles. And yet he worked with them. When Jesus came, he was preaching of a kingdom, wasn't he? And everybody thought it was going to be a physical kingdom. Everybody thought he was going to be the king. He was going to sit on the throne. He was going to defeat Rome. Everything was going to be good for the Jews. Remember, the Jews still don't like the Gentiles. They're looking at Jesus as being the one for them and them alone. And then when basically the Jews put him on the cross, rejected him, then when the preaching started, what happened? Was it just for the Jews then? It opened up for what? The Gentiles. For everyone. The same as here. He's going to work with Gentiles. He opened it up to everyone then. He wanted all to be saved. The Jews were pretty upset, weren't they? They wanted him all for themselves, but they didn't really want him, did they? And yet, he opened that salvation avenue up for all. Using the Gentiles. When he said, go into all the world teaching, did he mean just the Jews? Nope. He meant everyone. Everyone. That includes us. We're considered foreigners, but yet through Christ, we are his. Hubie.
You mentioned going to all the world. God used all the world to bring his son into existence.
Absolutely. All the world. Back here, he used foreigners. He used those that weren't Jewish. Those that were worship. Remember the Moabites? They didn't worship God, did they? They worshipped idols. He used them to bring about his whole plan. The same as he does us today. There's many out there that worship idols. Maybe not a golden calf or, what we would look at the biblical sense of saying, oh, they're worshiping idols. There's a lot more idols out there than we really realize, isn't there? Money, prestige, popularity. All of those things can be idols. Anything that you put before God is an idol. Those people, it was just a little more physical to them. But today, we do the same thing, don't we? We put a lot of things before God. And He told us at the very first, when He set about with the commandments, don't put any God before me. None. And yet, throughout history, from the time of the Garden of Eden, clear on through, what has happened? We've done that continually throughout our whole lives. And Jesus made a way, God made a way through Jesus that we can go beyond that. That we don't have to have those idols. That we can have one true God. And that's basically what He has done here in this whole thing. Naomi being discouraged, us being discouraged. Before we found Christ, we may have been living what we thought was a great life. But there was discouragement. I don't care how good of a life you have out there without Christ, there's still going to be discouragement, isn't there? And then what? Who do you have to turn to when you're out there in the world? There's no one to turn to, is there? You can turn to friends, but you know what? When the chips are down, friends generally are pretty scarce. They don't want to deal with your misery. But when you have Christ in your life, who do you have to turn to? Him. And yes, it doesn't mean that when you become a Christian that you don't have flat tires. It doesn't mean that it's all going to be rainbows and unicorns and everything's great. Nope, it's not. It's not going to be. It's going to be troubles just the same. But the difference is that we have someone to lean on. And in that, we have a family, which is this family right here, to lean on. I mean, we can't see God. We can't see Christ. Our faith, hope, and trust is in them, but we can't see them. But you know what? I can see every one of you. And I know that when the chips are down, if I need help, if I need prayers, I can count on every one of you. Because you're my family. And I would hope that you look at the family here the same. Because that's the important part of being a part of the body of Christ, is to have that connection. Just as this connection here between Naomi and Ruth and Obed. I mean, it's Ruth's kid. But Naomi has taken a big part of this, isn't she? So there's a lot more when you read these 4 short chapters than just reading a love story between a man and a woman, isn't there? Because you could read it that way and say, oh yeah, everything just... And they lived happily ever after in that enchanted kingdom. Was there problems in their lives? Absolutely. It doesn't go into all the particulars, but I'll guarantee you, if Boaz was a man of agricultural industry, guaranteed there were dry years. Guaranteed there was years the crop didn't produce. He was well off. He had many servants. If anybody has ever been an employer, how easy is it to keep your servants in line? Your employees, are they all good? No. He had problems, just like we do. But as you can see, when you put God first, things work out for the best. And that's what we see here in the fact that through all of this, down through the line, the lineage, it eventually leads to Christ. That's what all of us need to be thinking of. Everything should lead to Christ. Because that's our only hope of salvation. Any questions? Because we're done with Ruth. And I'll figure out something we'll do, like I say, next week. It may be a surprise for everybody, but I've got a couple of things kind of in the works. So I appreciate all your participation, your patience with me in doing this class. And hopefully we'll get something else going here this next week that will be something that we can use in our life. That was my main goal, is something that we can use in our life every day, that we can go over every Sunday morning, that will help us get through this life better.